I'm Amber Wilson, 32, working as a financial analyst in Boston. After years of hard work, I've built a modest but comfortable life for myself. So when I received mortgage documents in the mail for a house I never bought, I was confused. Then came the bombshell from my parents. We've decided you should be the one to pay for your sister's mortgage. When I refused, they actually sued me, demanding $480,000. What followed was a nightmare that tore my family apart and landed us in court. Before I tell you how this nightmare began, let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to hear more stories about family financial drama that might save you from the same fate. To understand how things got so catastrophically bad between me and my family, you need to know a bit about the Wilson family dynamics. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Connecticut with my parents, Eleanor and Richard Wilson, and my younger sister Heather, who's 4 years my junior. From as early as I can remember, there was always an imbalance in how my parents treated us. I was expected to be the responsible one, the achiever, the one who had it all together. Meanwhile, Heather was coddled, protected, and frankly, spoiled. If I got a B+ on a test, I'd be asked why it wasn't an A. If Heather got a C, my parents would celebrate that she passed and buy her something nice to encourage her. Our home wasn't outwardly abusive or anything that dramatic. It was filled with those subtle inequities that you don't fully process until you're an adult looking back. Like how I got a used bicycle for my 16th birthday while Heather got a car for hers. Or how I had to work part-time jobs throughout high school while Heather's only responsibility was to focus on being a teenager. I was the first in our family to go to college. I worked incredibly hard for a partial scholarship to Boston University, took out student loans for the rest, and worked 20 hours a week at the campus library to cover my living expenses. My parents contributed exactly $0 toward my education, claiming they needed to save for Heather's future. I didn't resent it then. I was proud of my independence and grit. Heather, on the other hand, went to 3 different colleges over 5 years, never completing a degree. My parents paid her full tuition each time, covered her apartment, gave her spending money, and never questioned when she dropped out to find herself. By the time she was 23, they had spent well over $150,000 on her abandoned educational pursuits, while I was still paying off my student loans. After college, I landed an entry-level position at a financial firm in Boston. I lived with 3 roommates in a cramped apartment, ate ramen noodles more often than I care to admit, and put every spare dollar toward my student debt. It took 5 years of living like that, along with several promotions, before I could afford my own 1-bedroom apartment. I built an emergency fund, contributed to my 401k, and eventually paid off my student loans by age 30. Financial independence was hard-won, but I was proud of it. Meanwhile, Heather bounced from job to job, retail, waitressing, administrative work, never staying anywhere longer than a few months. She lived in our parents' basement rent-free until she was 27. When she finally moved out, my parents co-signed her lease and paid her security deposit. They also furnished her apartment as a housewarming gift. Throughout our 20s, there were countless instances where my parents expected me to help out financially with Heather's needs. When her car broke down, my mother called me instead of a mechanic. "You're good with money," she'd say. "Surely you can spare a few $100s for your sister's car repair? She really needs it for work." Or when Heather wanted to go on vacation with friends but couldn't afford it, my father would call to suggest I treat her as a birthday gift, even if her birthday was months away. Each time, I felt a mixture of resentment and obligation. I'd usually give in, telling myself it was a one-time thing and that family helps family. But it was never just once. It became an unspoken expectation that since I was doing well, I should subsidize my sister's lifestyle. Family gatherings became increasingly tense as I entered my 30s. I'd mention a promotion or a small investment I'd made, and my mother would immediately turn the conversation to how Heather was struggling to make rent or how her credit card debt was stressing her out. The implication was always clear. Your success means you should be solving her problems. Last Thanksgiving was particularly uncomfortable. I'd just been promoted to senior financial analyst, which came with a significant salary increase. I made the mistake of mentioning it when my aunt asked how work was going. Within minutes, my father pulled me aside to ask if I'd consider helping out with Heather's debt consolidation loan. "She's drowning in interest payments," he said. "With your new position, it would barely make a dent in your finances." I deflected, saying I'd need to look at my budget. But as we were leaving, I overheard my mother telling Heather, "Don't worry, we'll figure something out with Amber. She doesn't understand how the real world works for normal people." The irony of this statement, coming from someone who had never allowed my sister to experience the actual real world, was not lost on me. Despite all this, I still craved my family's approval. I wanted them to be proud of what I'd accomplished through hard work and discipline. I wanted them to see that I'd built something meaningful without the safety net they'd always provided my sister. Deep down, I think I was still that little girl hoping that if I just achieved enough, they'd finally see me as worthy of the same love and support they so freely gave Heather. That hope, however misguided, was about to be shattered in the most devastating way imaginable. It was an ordinary Tuesday in April when I checked my mail after work. Among the usual bills and flyers was a thick envelope from Massachusetts Bay Mortgage Company. Thinking it was some kind of promotional material, I almost tossed it aside. But something made me open it. Inside was a complete set of mortgage documents for a property at 247 Oakwood Drive in Winchester, Massachusetts, an affluent suburb about 20 minutes from Boston. My name was listed as the borrower for a $480,000 loan. The monthly payment was calculated at $2,850 for a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage. I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience. I had never applied for this mortgage. I had never even seen this property. Yet there was my signature, or what appeared to be my signature, on several of the documents. I immediately called the mortgage company, but it was after business hours. I left an urgent message about potential fraud and identity theft, then spent a sleepless night wondering how this could have happened. The next morning, before I could follow up with the mortgage company, my mother called. "Did you get the mortgage papers?" she asked casually, as if she were asking about a birthday card she'd sent. "Mom, what's going on?" I demanded. "These papers have my name on them for a house I know nothing about." "Well, that's what we need to discuss," she said. "Your father and I think it's time we all got together for dinner. Can you come over tonight? Heather will be there too." My stomach nodded. "Mom, I need to know what's happening now. Is this some kind of identity theft?" "Don't be so dramatic, Amber," she sighed. "It's a family matter. We'll explain everything tonight." 6 o'clock. She hung up before I could protest further. I called in sick to work, something I rarely did, and spent the day in a fog of anxiety and confusion. That evening, I drove to my parents' house in Connecticut, the same house where I'd grown up. Heather's car was already in the driveway, a relatively new Honda Civic that my parents had helped her finance 2 years ago. When I walked in, they were all sitting in the living room, looking unnervingly calm. My mother poured me a glass of wine without asking if I wanted one. My father gestured to the armchair across from them, positioning me like I was at a job interview rather than a family dinner. "Amber," my father began, "we know you're confused about the mortgage documents, but we've been planning this for a while." "Planning what exactly?" I asked, the wine untouched on the coffee table between us. "Well, as you know, Heather has been renting that overpriced apartment in Cambridge," my mother chimed in. "And with the housing market being what it is, we thought it was time she owned something." "That's nice," I said cautiously. "But what does that have to do with me?" My father cleared his throat. "We found a perfect starter home in Winchester. Good neighborhood, good schools for when she eventually has children, convenient location. The thing is," my mother continued, With Heather's credit history and employment situation, she couldn't qualify for a mortgage on her own. A cold realization began to seep in. So you used my information? My credit? My income? My voice was rising with each question. Now, don't get upset, my father said sternly. We've decided that you should be the one to pay for this mortgage. I stared at them in disbelief. You've decided? Without asking me? Without my consent? You're doing so well in your career, my mother said, as if that explained everything. Your sister needs this house, and family takes care of family. Heather, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. It's not like you can't afford it, Amber. You're always talking about your promotions and investments. Meanwhile, I can barely make rent each month. Because you've never kept a job for more than a few months. I exploded. And even if I could afford it, which, by the way, I absolutely cannot without completely derailing my own financial future, that doesn't give anyone the right to commit fraud in my name. Fraud is a very ugly word, my mother said, frowning. We're family. How did you even do this? I demanded. How did you get my signature? My financial information. My father shifted uncomfortably. We still had your old tax returns from when you lived at home. And your mother, well, she's always been good at copying signatures. I felt physically ill. So you forged my signature on legal documents? Do you have any idea how serious this is? This is identity theft. This is fraud. This is a crime. Don't be so dramatic, Heather scoffed. It's not like we're strangers taking advantage of you. We're your family. A family that apparently thinks it's okay to steal my identity and saddle me with $500,000 of debt without my permission. I was shouting now, unable to contain my fury and disbelief. Lower your voice, my father commanded. The decision has been made. The house has already been purchased. Heather moves in next week. The decision has not been made, I said, standing up. I did not agree to this, and I will not be paying for a mortgage I didn't sign up for. What are you saying? My mother asked, her voice dangerous and low. I'm saying no. Absolutely not. I will not pay a single penny toward this mortgage. And tomorrow, I'm reporting this as fraud to the police and the mortgage company. There was a moment of stunned silence before all hell broke loose. Heather burst into tears, wailing about how I was ruining her life. My mother started listing all the sacrifices they'd made for me over the years, most of which were complete fabrications. My father threatened to disown me if I didn't do the right thing for once in your selfish life. The right thing? I laughed bitterly. The right thing would have been to teach Heather financial responsibility instead of enabling her dependence. The right thing would have been to respect me enough to at least ask before committing a felony in my name. I grabbed my purse and headed for the door. My mother followed me, grabbing my arm. If you walk out that door, you're no longer part of this family, she hissed. I looked her straight in the eye. If being part of this family means letting you destroy my financial future and break the law, then maybe I don't want to be part of it anymore. I drove home that night with tears streaming down my face, vacillating between rage, betrayal, and crushing grief. The family I'd spent my whole life trying to please had just revealed the true extent of their disregard for me. I wasn't a daughter to them. I was an ATM with an inconveniently independent mind. The morning after that disastrous family dinner, I called my friend Jessica, who works as a paralegal at a law firm specializing in financial crimes. I explained the situation, my voice still shaking with anger and disbelief. Amber, this is serious, Jessica said after listening to my story. What your parents did is identity theft and mortgage fraud. These are federal crimes with serious penalties. I know, I said, feeling sick. But they're my parents. And it would destroy my sister if they went to jail. Look, I'm not saying you need to press criminal charges right away, but you absolutely need to protect yourself legally and financially. This mortgage is in your name. If payments aren't made, it's your credit score that will tank, your future that will be affected. Jessica connected me with Rachel Goldstein, an attorney at her firm who agreed to see me pro bono for an initial consultation. Rachel didn't mince words. "First, we need to document everything," she said. "Then we need to formally notify the mortgage company, the property records office, and potentially the police that this mortgage was obtained fraudulently without your consent." "Will my parents go to jail?" I asked, still conflicted despite their betrayal. "That depends on whether you choose to press criminal charges," Rachel explained. "But regardless, you need to legally separate yourself from this mortgage before any payments are due." Over the next week, I gathered evidence: the forged documents, emails, and text messages from my parents admitting what they'd done, and a timeline of events. Rachel helped me draft a formal letter to my parents, sent by certified mail, stating unequivocally that I would not accept responsibility for the mortgage, that I was aware of the fraud committed in my name, and that I would be taking all necessary legal steps to protect myself. 3 days after they would have received my letter, my father called. I let it go to voicemail. "Amber, this childish tantrum has gone on long enough," his voice boomed from my phone speaker. "Your mother is beside herself, and Heather has been crying for days. You need to grow up and accept your family responsibilities. Call us immediately so we can sort this out like adults." I didn't call back. Instead, I followed Rachel's advice and sent formal notifications to the mortgage company and the county property records office, along with an affidavit stating that my signature had been forged. That's when things really escalated. My parents began calling me multiple times a day from different numbers to get around my call blocking. My mother showed up at my workplace, creating a scene in the lobby until security escorted her out. My father emailed my boss, claiming I was mentally unstable and making false accusations against family members. Thankfully, my boss recognized this as harassment and was supportive of me. Heather launched what I can only describe as a smear campaign on social media. She posted tearful videos about how her successful sister was trying to make her homeless out of spite. She shared manipulated screenshots of text conversations between us, edited to make me look heartless. She even created a GoFundMe titled "Abandoned by My Sister When I Needed Her Most," which raised several $1,000s based on a completely fictional version of events. The extended family got involved too. Aunts, uncles, and cousins I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly had strong opinions about my selfish behavior. Some sent me lengthy messages about family loyalty, others simply unfriended and blocked me on social media without even hearing my side. Only my maternal grandmother, Ruth, reached out with genuine concern. "Amber, honey, there seems to be a lot happening with your parents and sister. I'm not taking sides, but I'm here if you need to talk. I love you." That single message of unconditional support made me break down in tears. It was the only lifeline from my family that didn't come with manipulation attached. Meanwhile, the mortgage company's fraud department had opened an investigation, but warned me it could take months to resolve. They wouldn't confirm what actions they might take against my parents, citing the ongoing investigation. The stress began affecting every aspect of my life. I had trouble sleeping, often waking up from nightmares about being homeless or in prison for debts I didn't incur. My performance at work slipped, prompting a concerned check-in from my manager. I stopped going to my weekly yoga class, seeing friends, or doing much of anything beyond going to work and coming home to stare anxiously at my email for updates from Rachel or the mortgage company. Then came the ultimatum. My father left a voicemail that chilled me to the bone. "Amber, this is your final warning. Your mother and I have consulted with our attorney. If you don't withdraw your fraud claims and take responsibility for your sister's mortgage by the end of this week, we will be filing a lawsuit against you for the full value of the house. You might think you're clever with your fancy Boston lawyer, but we have decades of evidence of verbal agreements and family commitments that any judge will recognize. Don't test us on this." I immediately forwarded the voicemail to Rachel, who called me within minutes. "They're bluffing," she assured me. "There's no such thing as enforceable verbal agreements about taking on someone else's $500,000 mortgage. And family commitments aren't legally binding contracts. So I should ignore the threat?" I asked. Rachel paused. Not exactly. Frivolous or not, if they do file a lawsuit, you'll need to respond. And defending yourself, even against baseless claims, can be expensive and stressful. What should I do? Continue documenting everything. Don't engage directly with them. And Amber, you might want to consider filing for a restraining order given the escalating harassment. A restraining order against my own parents. The suggestion was so surreal that I laughed despite myself. But the laughter quickly turned to tears as the full weight of the situation crashed down on me again. How had it come to this? How had the people who were supposed to love and protect me become the ones I needed legal protection from? 4 days later, I was served with lawsuit papers at my apartment. My parents were indeed suing me for $480,000, the full value of the house they had fraudulently purchased in my name. Their legal complaint was a masterpiece of manipulation and revisionist history, claiming that I had verbally agreed to purchase a home for my sister, that I had reneged on a family pact, and that they had acted as my agents in good faith. It was absurd, infuriating, and terrifying all at once. Because regardless of how baseless their claims were, I was now facing a real lawsuit that could drain my savings, damage my professional reputation, and drag on for months or years. As I sat on my couch that night, legal papers scattered around me, I hit my lowest point. I felt utterly alone. The family I had spent a lifetime trying to please had not only betrayed me, but was now actively trying to destroy the independence I had worked so hard to build. For the first time, I allowed myself to wonder if I would be better off just giving in, paying the mortgage, accepting the financial setback, and trying to salvage whatever remained of my family relationships. But as the thought formed, I felt a surge of clarity cut through the emotional fog. No, this wasn't about money anymore. This was about standing up to decades of manipulation and unequal treatment. This was about refusing to be financially abused by the people who should have been my biggest supporters. I picked up my phone and called Rachel. "They're actually suing me," I said when she answered. "And I want to fight this. All the way." The lawsuit my parents filed against me was officially titled Wilson and Wilson vs. Wilson, a painfully ironic reflection of how family had turned against family. The complaint was 37 pages long, filled with allegations ranging from breach of verbal contract to unjust enrichment to familial fraud, that last one not even being a real legal concept. Rachel reviewed it and confirmed what she had suspected. It was a legally flimsy case designed primarily to intimidate me into compliance. But flimsy or not, I still needed to respond formally within 21 days or risk a default judgment against me. "I can help with the initial response," Rachel offered, "but for a case this complex, you really need a litigation attorney who specializes in family financial disputes." The problem was that litigation attorneys are expensive, prohibitively so for someone with a decent but not extravagant salary like mine. Rachel provided me with several referrals, and after consultations with 3 different lawyers, I settled on Marcus Bennett, who had a strong track record in cases involving family financial exploitation. His retainer was $10,000, which represented almost all of my emergency fund, money I had diligently saved over years of careful budgeting. "I'll be honest with you, Ms. Wilson," Marcus said during our first official meeting. "This case has no legal merit whatsoever. Your parents have no grounds to force you to pay for a mortgage you didn't consent to, especially one obtained through forged documents." "That's good news, right?" I asked. "Yes and no. The good news is that we should eventually win. The bad news is that eventually could be a long and expensive road. Your parents' strategy appears to be to drain you financially and emotionally until you give up and settle." Marcus helped me file a comprehensive answer to the complaint, denying all allegations and asserting counterclaims for harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and defamation based on the false statements my family had made about me publicly. We also filed a motion to dismiss the case entirely, arguing that there was no legal basis for their claims. But as Marcus had warned, the legal system moves slowly. The judge assigned to our case, Caroline Reeves, set a hearing date for the motion to dismiss, 3 months away. In the meantime, my life continued to unravel. The mortgage company's fraud investigation was ongoing, but they informed me that until it was resolved, the mortgage remained technically in my name, a fact that was already impacting my credit score and ability to make any other major financial decisions. My sister Heather had indeed moved into the house at the center of the dispute, posting smug photos on Instagram of her new home with captions like "so blessed" and "dreams do come true when you have people who love you." Each post felt like a deliberate twist of the knife. The financial strain became increasingly severe. Between the legal retainer, the ongoing attorney fees, and the time I had to take off work for depositions and meetings with Marcus, I was rapidly depleting my savings. I had to cancel a planned vacation, stop contributing to my 401k, and start using credit cards for basic expenses like groceries, something I had proudly avoided since my post-college years. The emotional toll was even worse. I lost 10 pounds in a month because I couldn't stomach food. My hair started falling out in clumps from stress. I had panic attacks in the middle of the night, waking up gasping for air, convinced I was drowning in invisible debt. My few remaining friends tried to be supportive, but it was clear they were baffled by the situation. "Can't you just work this out?" they'd ask. "They're your family, after all." Or worse, "Maybe you should consider helping your sister if you can afford it. Family is forever." These well-intentioned but clueless comments only deepened my isolation. No one seemed to understand the fundamental violation that had occurred, how my own parents had weaponized my financial responsibility against me, how they had committed actual crimes in my name, how they were now trying to legally strong-arm me into subsidizing my adult sister's lifestyle. Even my therapist, whom I started seeing weekly to cope with the anxiety, seemed to subtly suggest that perhaps there was a compromise to be found. "Sometimes in family conflicts, winning the battle means losing the war," she said during one session. "What would it mean to you to preserve these relationships, even at some financial cost?" I didn't return to her practice after that session. I didn't need someone else suggesting that I should sacrifice my financial well-being on the altar of toxic family dynamics. 3 months into the lawsuit, my parents' attorney approached Marcus with a settlement offer. I would take over the mortgage payments for 5 years, after which the house would be refinanced in Heather's name, assuming she could qualify by then. And my parents would drop the lawsuit. Marcus presented the offer without recommendation, simply asking what I wanted to do. I sat in his office, staring at the settlement document, a turmoil of emotions churning inside me. Part of me, the exhausted, financially drained, emotionally depleted part, was tempted to accept just to end the nightmare. 5 years of mortgage payments would be crippling but not completely ruinous. I could recover eventually. But then I thought about what accepting would really mean. It would mean that my parents' tactics had worked. It would mean that forging my signature, stealing my identity, and then suing me when I objected was a successful strategy. It would mean signing up for 5 more years of financial control and manipulation. "No," I said finally, my voice stronger than it had been in months. "I won't settle. Not for 5 years, not for 5 months, not for 5 minutes. What they did was wrong, and I won't validate it by giving in now." Marcus nodded, a hint of approval in his expression. "I'll convey your response." "And Ms. Wilson?" "For what it's worth, I think you're making the right call." The night before our court date for the motion to dismiss, I hit rock bottom. Sitting alone in my apartment, surrounded by legal documents, unpaid bills, and the remnants of a dinner I couldn't finish, I broke down completely. I sobbed until I could barely breathe, great heaving cries that seemed to come from the deepest part of me. I cried for the little girl who had always tried so hard to earn her parents' approval. I cried for the young woman who had put herself through college without support. I cried for the adult who had built a life of financial responsibility only to have it threatened by the very people who should have been proudest of her achievements. And as the tears finally subsided, I felt something shift within me. The grief was still there, but alongside it was a steely resolve. I would not be broken by this. I would not let them win. Whatever happened in court tomorrow, I would face it with the same determination that had carried me through every other challenge in my life. I texted Marcus, "I'm ready for tomorrow. Whatever it takes." His response came quickly, "Get some rest. I'll see you at the courthouse at 8:30 a.m. And Amber? You're stronger than you know." For the first time in months, I slept through the night without nightmares. The county courthouse was an imposing stone building that seemed designed to intimidate. I arrived at 8:15 a.m., 15 minutes earlier than planned, wearing my most professional navy blue suit and low heels. Marcus met me on the courthouse steps, briefcase in hand and confidence in his stride. "Remember," he said as we walked through the security checkpoint, "Judge Reeves has a reputation for being thorough and fair, but she doesn't tolerate emotional appeals in place of legal arguments. Let me do the talking unless she directly addresses you." We were directed to courtroom 4B, where several other cases were scheduled before ours. I spotted my parents and Heather sitting on the opposite side of the gallery, all three dressed in conservative outfits that screamed respectable family. My mother clutched a handkerchief as if already prepared to dab at theatrical tears. My father sat rigidly upright, jaw clenched in the expression I'd known since childhood to mean he expected complete compliance. Heather kept her eyes down, but I caught her shooting me a venomous glance when she thought I wasn't looking. Their attorney, Lawrence Peterson, was a silver-haired man in an expensive suit who exuded smug confidence. He nodded curtly in Marcus's direction, but didn't acknowledge me at all. At precisely 9 a.m., the bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Caroline Reeves entered. She was a black woman in her late 50s with close-cropped gray hair and intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses. She moved through the preliminary cases efficiently but not rushly, giving each matter her full attention before moving to the next. At 10:45 a.m., the bailiff finally called Wilson and Wilson versus Wilson. My stomach clenched as Marcus and I approached the plaintiff's table while my parents and attorney Peterson took their places at the defense table. "We're here on the defendant's motion to dismiss," Judge Reeves stated, looking down at the file before her. "I've reviewed the complaint, the answer, and all supporting documents. Attorney Bennett, as the moving party, you may begin." Marcus stood and buttoned his jacket. "Thank you, Your Honor. This case should be dismissed with prejudice because it fails to state any valid legal claim upon which relief can be granted. The plaintiffs, Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, are attempting to enforce a non-existent, verbal agreement that their daughter, my client Amber Wilson, would pay for a mortgage for a house purchased for their other daughter, Heather Wilson." He proceeded to methodically dismantle each claim in my parents' lawsuit, pointing out that no evidence existed of any agreement, that verbal contracts for real estate transactions were unenforceable under the statute of frauds, and that my parents had admitted in writing to forging my signature on mortgage documents, a federal crime. "Furthermore, Your Honor," Marcus continued, "we have filed a counterclaim for the emotional distress caused by this harassment campaign, as well as for the damage to Ms. Wilson's credit score and financial standing resulting from the fraudulent mortgage." Judge Reeves listened attentively, occasionally making notes. When Marcus finished, she turned to Attorney Peterson. "Counsel for the plaintiffs, your response?" Peterson rose with a flourish. "Your Honor, this case is fundamentally about family obligations and implied contracts that exist within the unique context of family relationships. The Wilsons raised their daughter, provided for her education, and supported her career aspirations. In return, there was an understanding that when her sister needed assistance, Amber would provide it. I had to bite my tongue to keep from interrupting with the truth that my parents had contributed nothing to my education and that any understanding existed solely in their imaginations. Marcus had warned me to maintain a neutral expression regardless of what was said, but it took every ounce of self-control I possessed. Peterson continued, his voice taking on a dramatic quality. The Wilsons acted as agents for their daughter in securing this mortgage, believing in good faith that she had agreed to help her sister achieve the American dream of homeownership. Only after the purchase was complete did Ms. Wilson renege on this family commitment, leaving her parents with no choice but to seek legal remedy. Judge Reeves's expression remained neutral, but her next question suggested skepticism. Counselor, are you arguing that parents have an inherent legal right to forge their adult child's signature on mortgage documents based on a presumed family commitment? Peterson faltered slightly. Not in those exact terms, Your Honor, but within the context of this specific family dynamic. Let's be very clear, Judge Reeves interrupted. The complaint itself acknowledges that Ms. Wilson's signature was applied to these documents without her physical presence. Are the plaintiffs disputing that this occurred? They're not disputing the signature issue, Your Honor, Peterson admitted, but they maintain that they had implied authority to act on her behalf based on previous family financial arrangements. Judge Reeves raised an eyebrow. I'd like to hear directly from the plaintiffs on this point. Mr. Wilson, please approach. My father stood and walked to the witness stand where he was sworn in. His testimony was a masterclass in revisionist history and emotional manipulation. Your Honor, we've always been a close family that helps each other, he began, his voice warm and paternal. When Amber was succeeding in her career, we were so proud. We naturally assumed, based on our family values, that she would want to help her sister who hasn't been as fortunate. Did you specifically ask MS Wilson if she would take on a $480,000 mortgage for her sister before you completed these documents? Judge Reeves asked. Well, not in those exact words, my father hedged. But we've had many conversations over the years about Heather's housing situation and Amber's responsibility as the successful sibling to help out. So that's a no, Judge Reeves stated flatly. You did not explicitly ask, and she did not explicitly agree. It was understood, my father insisted. Mr. Wilson, understanding that you are under oath, Judge Reeves continued, did you or did you not forge your daughter's signature on these mortgage documents? My father shifted uncomfortably. I wouldn't use the word forge, Your Honor. My wife signed on Amber's behalf because we genuinely believed she would want to help her sister. Judge Reeves's expression hardened. Mr. Wilson, signing someone else's name without their express permission is the definition of forgery. It doesn't matter if that person is your daughter or a complete stranger. My mother was called next and delivered a tearful performance about how I had abandoned my family responsibilities and how they had only acted out of desperate concern for Heather's well-being. Heather followed with her own testimony, painting herself as the victim of my financial bullying and selfish success. Throughout their testimonies, Marcus made occasional objections when their statements veered into hearsay or unsubstantiated claims, most of which Judge Reeves sustained. When it was my turn to testify, I took a deep breath and reminded myself to stick to the facts. I explained how I had put myself through college without parental support, how I had built my financial stability through years of careful planning and sacrifices, and how I had never, not once, agreed to take on a mortgage for my sister. MS Wilson, Judge Reeves asked, have there been previous instances where your parents made financial decisions on your behalf without your consent? Yes, Your Honor, I replied, and proceeded to detail several smaller instances over the years, credit card applications submitted in my name, loan co-signing I hadn't agreed to, tax returns filed on my behalf without my review. And did you confront them about these incidents? I did, Your Honor. Each time, they dismissed my concerns, saying it was just family helping family and that I was being unnecessarily formal about money matters. During cross-examination, Peterson tried to portray me as cold and uncaring, asking loaded questions like, isn't it true that you've consistently put your own financial interests above your sister's well-being? And would it really have been such a hardship to help your struggling sister when you're doing so well financially? Marcus objected to most of these questions as argumentative, and Judge Reeves sustained the objections, occasionally reminding Peterson to stick to legally relevant questions. The most damning evidence came during the final phase of the hearing, when Marcus introduced a series of text messages and emails between my parents that I had only recently discovered through the legal discovery process. In one exchange, my father had written to my mother, "Amber will never agree to this if we ask directly. Better to move forward and present it as a fait accompli. She's always been too independent for her own good." In another, my mother had replied, "Once the papers are signed and Heather is moved in, what can she really do? She won't let her sister become homeless, no matter how much she complains." These messages revealed the premeditated nature of their actions and directly contradicted their testimony about implied authority and family understanding. As the hearing concluded, Judge Reeves looked at all parties over the rim of her glasses. "I'll take this matter under advisement and issue my ruling within 10 days. But I want to be very clear about something. Family relationships, no matter how close, do not override basic legal principles about consent, contracts, and identity theft." Court is adjourned. As we gathered our papers, I caught my mother's eye across the courtroom. For a brief moment, I thought I saw a flicker of uncertainty, maybe even regret, in her expression. But it was quickly replaced by the familiar mask of righteous indignation as she turned away. "You did well," Marcus told me as we exited the courthouse. The judge seemed receptive to our arguments, and those text messages were particularly compelling. But legal victories rarely feel satisfying in family cases. "Are you prepared for that?" I nodded slowly. I think I realized something important in there today. This was never really about the money. It was about respect, or the lack of it. They've never respected me as an independent adult with the right to make my own choices. "And now?" Marcus asked. "Now I need to respect myself enough to hold that boundary, whatever the judge decides." As we parted ways on the courthouse steps, I felt an unexpected sense of calm. The outcome still hung in the balance, but I had spoken my truth, not just to the court, but to my family and to myself. Whatever happened next, that, at least, was a victory no one could take from me. 9 days after the hearing, I was in a budget meeting at work when my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Ruling is in. Call me when you can." My heart pounded as I excused myself and stepped into the hallway. Marcus answered on the first ring. "Judge Reeves dismissed the case with prejudice," he said without preamble. "She also granted our motion for sanctions against your parents and their attorney for filing a frivolous lawsuit." I leaned against the wall, legs suddenly weak. What exactly does that mean? It means several things. First, the case is completely dead. They can't refile it or bring these claims again. Second, they'll have to pay a portion of your legal fees as a penalty for abusing the legal system. And third, the judge included some very strongly worded opinions about their conduct that might be relevant if the mortgage company or prosecutors decide to pursue the fraud angle. I closed my eyes, relief washing over me in waves. "How much of my legal fees?" She awarded $15,000, which won't cover everything but will certainly help. "There's more, though." The judge also granted a temporary restraining order preventing your parents or sister from contacting you directly for the next 90 days. She cited the pattern of harassment and intimidation. I hadn't even asked for a restraining order at the hearing, though Rachel had suggested it months earlier. Judge Reeves had evidently seen enough in the evidence to determine it was necessary. "There's one more thing," Marcus continued. Judge Reeves referred the matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal investigation regarding the mortgage fraud. "That doesn't mean charges will be filed. That's entirely up to the DA, but the possibility is now on the table." This news landed with more complexity. While part of me felt vindicated that the legal system had recognized the severity of what my parents had done, another part still recoiled at the thought of them facing criminal charges. "What happens with the house and mortgage?" I asked. The judge ordered that the mortgage company be formally notified of her findings, which should help resolve your fraud claim with them. As for the house itself, that's between your parents, your sister, and the mortgage company now. Legally, you're completely disconnected from it. When I hung up, I sat in the office stairwell for several minutes, trying to process the mixture of relief, vindication, grief, and lingering anger that swirled within me. I had won completely and unequivocally, yet victory felt nothing like I had imagined it would. News of the ruling spread quickly. By that evening, it had somehow leaked to local media, with a headline in the Boston Globe's online edition reading, "Judge rules against parents who forged daughter's signature on mortgage." The article was brief but accurate, citing court documents and including a statement from Marcus about the importance of respecting financial boundaries even within families. I turned off my phone that night, unable to face the inevitable barrage of reactions. When I turned it back on the next morning, I had 47 missed calls, over 100 text messages, and countless social media notifications. Some were from journalists seeking comments. Many were from extended family members, some expressing shock and support, others condemning me for taking family matters to court. Several were from old friends who had initially sided with my sister, but were now awkwardly attempting to reconnect. The most shocking, however, was a voicemail from my sister Heather, left at 2:13 a.m. "I hope you're happy now," she slurred, clearly intoxicated. "Mom's had 2 panic attacks since the ruling. Dad's talking about declaring bankruptcy. And I have 30 days to get out of my house because the bank is foreclosing. You've destroyed this family, Amber. I always knew you were selfish, but I never thought you'd go this far. I hope your precious money keeps you warm at night because you don't have a family anymore." I deleted the message after listening to it once, deciding not to give it any power over my emotions. Whatever happened with the house was the consequence of my parents' actions, not mine. I couldn't control how they chose to interpret events or whether they ever accepted responsibility. 3 days after the ruling, I received an unexpected email from my Uncle Paul, my father's brother who had distanced himself from the family years ago for reasons I'd never fully understood. "Amber, I've been following what happened with your parents and the mortgage situation. I want you to know that I'm proud of you for standing your ground. What they did to you, they did similar versions of to me back in the 90s. It's a pattern that goes back generations in this family. I'm sorry you had to go through this alone. If you ever want to talk, I'm here." His email provided a missing piece of the puzzle. This wasn't just about me or even about Heather. It was about a deeply entrenched family dynamic of financial exploitation disguised as family helping family. Knowing that I wasn't the first to experience it and that Uncle Paul had survived and thrived after setting boundaries gave me a strange sense of peace. A week later, the mortgage company formally concluded their fraud investigation, sending me official documentation that my name had been removed from all records associated with the property and that my credit report would be corrected. They were pursuing their own legal options against my parents, but assured me that I was completely cleared of any responsibility. As predicted, the media attention faded quickly. My story was unusual enough to make local news, but not sensational enough to have staying power. Within 2 weeks, the articles disappeared from front pages, replaced by newer scandals and human interest stories. What didn't fade as quickly were the personal reverberations. Extended family members who had initially condemned me started reaching out after reading the judge's ruling, offering belated support that felt hollow after their earlier silence. I responded politely but distantly to most, recognizing that rebuilding trust would take time if it happened at all. My sister's social media underwent a dramatic transformation. Gone were the smug photos of her house, replaced by vague inspirational quotes about overcoming adversity and toxic people. She never directly mentioned me or the lawsuit, but her passive-aggressive allusions were transparent to anyone familiar with the situation. According to mutual acquaintances, Heather had moved back into my parents' basement while they appealed to the mortgage company for leniency. The house in Winchester stood empty, a physical manifestation of the consequences of their actions. My mother attempted to contact me once, about a month after the ruling, from a new phone number that bypassed my blocking. Her voicemail was brief and tense. "Amber, this has all gone too far. We need to talk as a family and find a solution. Call me back." I didn't. The most unexpected outcome came 6 weeks after the court ruling, when I received a formal letter from the district attorney's office. They had reviewed Judge Reeves's referral and had decided not to pursue criminal charges against my parents, citing my lack of interest in pressing charges and the civil remedies already applied. The letter concluded with a note that the decision could be revisited if new evidence emerged or if I changed my mind about criminal proceedings. I felt an immense relief at this news. While I had needed to protect myself legally and financially, I had never wanted to see my parents face criminal penalties. The civil ruling had accomplished what I needed: a clean break from the fraudulent mortgage and formal recognition that what they had done was wrong. As the initial shock waves settled, I focused on rebuilding my financial security. The $15,000 in awarded legal fees helped offset some of my costs, though I had still spent considerably more defending myself. I created a new budget, started rebuilding my emergency fund, and resumed contributions to my retirement accounts. More importantly, I began rebuilding my emotional well-being. I found a new therapist who specialized in family estrangement and financial abuse, someone who validated my experience instead of pushing for reconciliation at any cost. I reconnected with friends who had stood by me and gradually expanded my social circle to include people who respected boundaries and healthy relationships. 6 months after the ruling, I received an unexpected package at my apartment. Inside was a small wooden box I recognized from my childhood, a jewelry box my grandfather had made for me that had always remained at my parents' house. With it was a brief note in my grandmother Ruth's handwriting: "This belongs with you. Love always, Grandma." I called her that evening, and for the first time, she shared her own complicated history with my parents. "Your mother has always played favorites," she said gently. "She did it with her sisters, too. I should have stepped in more when you were young, but, well, hindsight is always clearer." That conversation with Grandma Ruth was the beginning of a new relationship between us. One based on mutual respect and honest communication rather than the performative family harmony that had masked dysfunction for so long. As the 6-month mark passed, I realized something important. Despite the trauma and financial strain of the lawsuit, I felt lighter than I had in years. The constant anxiety of waiting for the next unreasonable family demand had lifted. The exhausting effort of trying to earn approval that would never come had ceased. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I was truly independent, not just financially, but emotionally. The media attention had entirely disappeared by then, but occasionally I would receive a message from a stranger who had heard about my case through legal circles or personal networks. "Your story helped me set boundaries with my own financially abusive parents," one woman wrote. "Thank you for fighting so publicly for what was right." These messages reminded me that standing up for myself hadn't just been about a mortgage or money. It had been about challenging a narrative that financial exploitation is acceptable when it comes from family, a narrative that traps too many people in cycles of abuse disguised as love. I never did hear directly from my parents again. Through the family grapevine, I learned that they had indeed declared bankruptcy and were downsizing to a smaller home. Heather had apparently found a job as an administrative assistant and was turning her life around, though what that meant in practical terms varied depending on who was telling the story. I wished them well from a distance, but I had no illusions about reconciliation. Some bridges, once burned, cannot and should not be rebuilt. Some relationships are healthier in their absence than in their presence. One crisp autumn day, about 8 months after the court ruling, I was having coffee with my friend Jessica, the paralegal who had first helped me navigate the legal maze, when she asked a question that gave me pause. "Do you ever regret it? Standing your ground, I mean. Given everything it cost you." I considered the question carefully, watching the steam rise from my coffee cup. "No," I said finally. "It cost me a lot financially, emotionally, even some relationships I thought were solid. But it gave me something more valuable, the knowledge that I can protect myself, that my boundaries matter, and that I don't have to set myself on fire to keep others warm." Jessica nodded, understanding in her eyes. "That's worth more than a house in Winchester." "Exactly," I smiled. "It's the foundation for building something better." 1 year after Judge Reeves dismissed my parents' lawsuit, I found myself sitting in a small cafe in Cambridge, across from a young woman named Rachel who reminded me painfully of myself from 18 months earlier. She was clutching a folder of bank statements, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion and stress. "My parents took out a car loan in my name," she explained, voice trembling. "They say it's my duty to help them since they raised me. But I'm still paying off my student loans, and I can barely make my own rent." I had met Rachel through an online support group for survivors of family financial abuse, a group I had joined 6 months earlier as part of my own healing journey and had eventually become a moderator for. This was our first in-person meeting, a step beyond the digital conversations that had connected us. First, I told her gently, "I want you to know that you're not alone in this. What they're doing is not normal or acceptable, no matter how they try to frame it." As I walked her through her options, from credit freezes to formal fraud reports to potential legal remedies, I reflected on how far I had come in my own recovery process. The immediate aftermath of the lawsuit had been brutal. Despite the legal victory, I had experienced a profound grief, not just for the family I had lost, but for the family I had never actually had. The idealized version of my parents and sister that I had clung to for so long had been irrevocably shattered, forcing me to confront the reality that they had always viewed me more as a resource than as a person with my own needs and boundaries. In those first few months, I had oscillated between numbing detachment and overwhelming emotion. I would go days feeling nothing, efficiently going through the motions of work and basic self-care, only to be ambushed by waves of rage or sorrow that left me gasping. A song on the radio, a family photo on a colleague's desk, a casual mention of someone's weekend plans with their parents, any of these could trigger a spiral of grief that felt bottomless. My therapist, Dr. Lena Martinez, had been instrumental in helping me navigate this emotional terrain. "You're not just grieving the loss of your family relationships as they were," she explained during one particularly difficult session. "You're grieving the loss of the fantasy of what those relationships could have been. And you're mourning the childhood you deserved but didn't get." This framing had been revelatory. It gave me permission to acknowledge the depth of my loss, while also recognizing that what I was losing had largely been an illusion, a story I had told myself to make the reality of my family's dysfunction more bearable. Therapy also helped me untangle the complex web of guilt, obligation, and distorted responsibility that had been woven through my family relationships. I came to understand how my parents had conditioned me from childhood to view my own needs as selfish and my sister's needs as paramount, creating a dynamic where any boundary setting on my part was framed as an attack on family unity. Financial abuse is particularly insidious, Dr. Martinez had noted, because money is so entangled with survival, security, and in many families, expressions of love. When someone manipulates your finances, they're not just attacking your bank account, they're undermining your sense of safety in the world. This insight had helped me reframe my experience not as a petty dispute over money, but as a necessary act of self-protection against people who had repeatedly demonstrated they did not have my best interests at heart. The practical rebuilding of my life had happened alongside this emotional work. 6 months after the lawsuit, I had received a significant promotion at work, moving from senior financial analyst to team leader with a substantial salary increase. The irony wasn't lost on me. My professional expertise in finance had been instrumental in recognizing and fighting the financial abuse in my personal life. I had also made a major housing change, moving from my one-bedroom apartment to a sunlit two-bedroom condo that I purchased with a carefully structured mortgage that felt empowering rather than imprisoning. The second bedroom became a combination home office and guest room, symbolizing both my professional advancement and my openness to new, healthier relationships in my life. My social circle had undergone a similar transformation. While some friendships had been casualties of the family conflict, people who couldn't understand my harshness toward my parents or who felt uncomfortable with the messy reality of family estrangement, other relationships had deepened. Jessica, my paralegal friend who had first connected me with legal help, had become one of my closest confidants. My colleague Mark, who had covered for me during my numerous court-related absences without question or judgment, had evolved from work friend to genuine friend. Most surprisingly, I had developed a meaningful relationship with my Uncle Paul, my father's estranged brother. Our initial email exchange had blossomed into regular phone calls and eventually visits. Through him, I gained insight into the intergenerational patterns of financial manipulation in my father's family, helping me understand that what had happened wasn't personal. It was a toxic pattern my parents were reenacting rather than a specific rejection of me. Your grandfather did the same thing to your father that he tried to do to you, Uncle Paul explained during one of our conversations. The difference is that your father capitulated, became part of the system, and then perpetuated it. You broke the cycle. That framing, that I had broken a cycle rather than a family, became crucial to my healing. It transformed my experience from a personal failure to maintain family harmony into a courageous refusal to perpetuate dysfunction. Another unexpected source of healing came through connecting with other survivors of family financial abuse. The online support group where I met Rachel had initially been just a place to share resources and advice, but it evolved into a community that provided the unconditional support and understanding that had been so conspicuously absent in my biological family. Within that community, I found my voice as an advocate. I began sharing my story more openly, first anonymously in the group, then in a blog under my real name, and eventually in occasional speaking engagements at financial literacy workshops. Each time I articulated my experience, it lost a bit more of its power to hurt me and gained power to potentially help others. Your story gave me the courage to check my credit report, one group member wrote. I found 3 accounts I never opened. I wouldn't have looked if you hadn't shared what happened to you. Messages like this reinforced that something meaningful could emerge from my pain, that the boundaries I had fought so hard to establish could create safe space, not just for me, but for others struggling with similar violations. Around the 1-year mark after the lawsuit, I received an unexpected email from my sister Heather. Unlike her previous communications, which had been filled with blame and entitlement, this message was subdued and tentative. I've been doing a lot of thinking, she wrote. I'm not ready to say I understand everything that happened or that I agree with all your choices, but I've started to see some patterns in how Mom and Dad interact with me that made me think about what you were trying to tell us. I'm working with a therapist now. I don't expect a response, but I wanted you to know. I deliberated for days about whether to reply. In consultation with Dr. Martinez, I eventually sent a brief, compassionate but boundaried response, acknowledging her message and wishing her well in her therapy journey, but not opening the door to immediate reconciliation. Whatever healing might be possible between Heather and me would require time, individual growth, and fundamentally changed dynamics, not a hasty papering over of deep wounds. There had been no further contact from my parents. Through family gossip that occasionally reached me via distant relatives, I knew they had downsized to a condominium after their bankruptcy and that my father had been forced to delay his retirement plans. I felt no satisfaction in their financial difficulties, but I also recognized that they were experiencing the natural consequences of their own choices, not punishments I had inflicted on them. As for my own financial recovery, it had been slower but steadier than I initially feared. The legal fees had depleted my savings, but my new higher salary allowed me to rebuild my emergency fund within 10 months. I worked with a financial advisor to create even stronger protections for my assets, including identity theft monitoring services, regular credit freezes, and a comprehensive estate plan that explicitly outlined my wishes regarding financial decisions should I become incapacitated. "You've turned financial trauma into financial empowerment," my advisor commented during our annual review. "That's rare and impressive." Sitting across from Rachel in that Cambridge cafe, I could see in her the same mixture of fear, determination, and hope that had carried me through my own ordeal. As she asked questions and took notes, her posture gradually shifted from hunched defensiveness to something more upright and resolved. "What if they never forgive me?" she asked finally, voicing the question that had haunted me for months. "That's the hardest part," I admitted. But eventually I realized I was asking the wrong question. The real question isn't whether they'll forgive you for protecting yourself. It's whether you'll forgive yourself if you don't. Rachel nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. "I think I need to make some calls," she said, gathering her documents with new purpose. As we parted, I handed her my card. "Whatever you decide, you're not alone in this. The group is there, and so am I." Walking back to my condo afterward, I reflected on the strange, painful, ultimately liberating journey of the past 18 months. The family I had desperately tried to please for 32 years was no longer in my life, and that loss still ached in quiet moments. But in their place had grown something perhaps more valuable. An unshakable trust in my own judgment, a community of chosen family built on mutual respect rather than obligation, and the knowledge that I had the strength to protect my boundaries even against the people I had been taught all my life to sacrifice them for. The lawsuit that my parents had intended as a tool of control had instead become the catalyst for my complete liberation from their emotional and financial manipulation. In trying to force me to pay for a house for my sister, they had inadvertently pushed me to build something far more valuable for myself, a life defined by authentic connections, clear boundaries, and the quiet confidence that comes from weathering a storm and finding yourself still standing on the other side. As I reached my building, my phone pinged with a message from the support group moderators. Another new member had joined, sharing a story distressingly similar to mine and Rachel's. I paused on my doorstep, composing a thoughtful welcome message. The cycle of financial exploitation that had damaged so many families might never be completely broken, but each person who found the courage to say no more weakened its hold on future generations. That, perhaps, was the most profound lesson of my journey, that sometimes the most loving legacy we can leave is not financial support or material assistance, but the example of what healthy boundaries look like and the courage to maintain them even at great personal cost. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family over financial matters? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. And if my story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories about navigating complex family dynamics. Remember, protecting your financial well-being isn't selfish, it's essential self-care. Thank you for listening, and I hope my journey helps you find the courage to honor your own boundaries, whatever they may be.